just makes me laugh. Yeah, good luck with that. It's amazing you have a 4-valve motor with this kind of torque. Well, let's see what you can do.
Welcome to an episode of Jay Leno's Garage. The vehicles we're featuring today, a couple of Ducati Multistrada V4Ss. These are 2021 models. You know, I bought my first new Ducati back in the early 80s. I bought a Halewood replica, and I always loved the company, and they were always right on the edge of business collapse or failure because the bikes were, I don't know if they were too good or whatever the problem was. Certainly not the electrics, but they could be troublesome, but just the wonderful bikes, storied bikes, wonderful bikes to ride, just all the classic Italian problems of the day. Now they're owned by, of course, the Volkswagen Group and Audi and all those guys. So the electrics, everything is very modern, very up to date. In fact, this bike has some features no bike has ever had. I think it's the first bike to do it. We'll talk about that in just a second. It is a V4. It's about 1,158 cc's, 170 horsepower. And no, they didn't give me one. This is not a commercial, but in the sense it kind of is, because I like to help these kind of manufacturers that really don't have the big budget to do the big la-di-da ads and stuff, you know. Ducatis sell themselves this way, word of mouth, YouTube, and I'm glad to help out. I have Jason Chenik with me. He is the CEO of Ducati North America. Come on in, how are you?
I'm doing well, thanks, Jay.
Well, it must be great to have a product that doesn't have electrical problems, because you remember back in the day, yeah, I remember I had a Ducati once, an early one, a single, and all the wires were the same color. There was no way to, yeah, it just sort of, I mean, spaghetti was the word, and it was just sort of crazy. When you got it running, oh, you just felt fantastic because you had accomplished something. But luckily, all that is done with. And of course, the legendary V4. You know, Ducati had one of the very first V4s back in the early 60s, a bike called the Apollo. It was sort of based on the 90-degree Desmodronic V-twin that they had, which is the same as the Halewood, but a 4-cylinder. It was going to be like their Moto Guzzi Eldorado, a touring bike, maybe a police bike. And remember, this predates the Honda 4, the Benelli, any of that stuff. So it was going to be, Moto Guzzi had a 4, but they were so exotic, and they were mostly race bikes. I think the Apollo even did predate the Guzzi 600 4.
I believe so.
So the tradition of 4-cylinder motorcycles is not new to the company. You know, it's interesting. When I was a kid, you had a dirt bike for the dirt, and maybe had a cafe bike for cafe racing and zipping around. Then you had the touring bike. This is sort of all of that in one, isn't it? That's what Salta Multistrada mean. What does it mean? Many roads, I think? Is that
exactly, many roads. And the concept of the new V4 Multistrada was for us to rule many roads. So the idea of us not just having one bike that does those individual things, which is a nice to have, but at the end of the day, if you can have one motorcycle that by the flick of a button, like on the controls here, can actually morph into these 4 different bikes, you know, one for off-road, one for touring, one for city riding, and then of course, the natural soul of a Ducati is putting it in sport mode.
Right.
And it becomes a Ducati that people know.
Well, it's interesting because cars have all become SUVs. Aston Martin's got a new one out. We drove that. That was pretty cool. Mercedes. The idea of the family sedan is now the family SUV. A lot of companies don't even make sedans anymore because they just have no use for them. So and this is sort of the same thing in motorcycle. It's sort of a motorcycle SUV because it can do everything.
Yes, absolutely. In fact, this concept, we had originally launched the Multistrada in 2003, which was an air-cooled 2-valve twin,
right,
1,000 cc, and it eventually evolved to 2010 where we put the 4-valve motor in, and then this V4 is a completely new revolution in terms of not only the technology that's in the bike, the performance that you get out of it, but also, as you were talking about kind of the maintenance reliability of Ducatis, the service intervals. We've gone from the 6,000 mile service intervals on the Multistrada 1000 to 36,000.
Wow.
That's like circumnavigating the world 1.5 times before you need to have an inspection.
Yeah, and that's mean like valve adjustment, that type of thing.
Exactly. That's when they actually pull off the cylinder heads to take a look and inspect the valves. But 36,000 miles, you think about that, most people don't really ride that
right.
on many motorcycles
right.
in their lifetime.
Yeah, well, that's a lot of mileage for a bike. Yeah, it's really fascinating how far they've come. I mentioned some technology before. Now this has blind spot warning. Is that what it is?
Yes, actually, it's the first motorcycle with production motorcycle with radar installed on it, and it allows you to have blind spot detection. So if you're going down the highway, you'll have a little light that shines in the corner of your mirror that just lets you know that there's a car there. If you put your turn signal on, it'll start flashing to warn you to not move over.
Okay.
Which, I just was driving in LA last night, and you always have somebody coming up the freeway behind you much faster than the rest of traffic. So it's a really nice safety feature.
The other day I'm riding my 31 Indian, and that has nothing. It didn't even have mirrors, and you forget. You get so used to modern bikes. You literally have to go, and with a full face helmet, you can't see anything. It was the most frightening thing in the world. You don't realize how many safety features you have. There's no anti-lock brake, and nothing on it, And this, of course, has all of that, doesn't it? ABS.
Yeah, and the ABS is actually a cornering ABS that understands if you're leaned over, and it will modulate the brakes based on where your position of the motorcycle is. Because if you're leaned over in a corner, you don't want to grab a fistful of brakes.
Right.
It will totally change the geometry of the motorcycle.
Right.
But the radar I was talking about also allows the comfort of adaptive cruise control.
Right.
Which, if you're going long distances across the country, you need to shake that hand out every once in a while.
Yeah.
You can keep the cruise control on, and if the car slows down or speeds up in front of you, it will adapt based on the gap that you put in between yourself and the car.
Well, I mean, yeah, it's pretty amazing. Well, very cool. Nice looking bike, classic Italian style. And this isn't even at 170 horse. This is the same motor they put in the, how do you say it?
Panigale.
Panigale, yeah. And that's what, 231 horsepower?
Yeah, we get all the way up to 234 for the Panigale V4R. It's incredible.
It's reached the point where bikes are so much faster and better than I am. It's just like, I have the kind of bikes, people aren't amazed you got there quickly. They're amazed you got there at all. It's like, really? You rode that here? Yes, I did. I rode my 1918 Pope once to a thing, and people were like, what? How come you didn't get killed? So I was very lucky, So it's a lot of fun. I know, I go out on modern bikes now, and I think I'm going fast. I was up at the Crest, and I was doing 85, 90, and I'm going to, guys are going by me 130, 130. I'm like, Jesus, it's like crazy. So when people think, 170 horse, that's not as much as, believe me, most people could not use all this power.
Yeah, and the V4 motor, the way it delivers the power, you got great mid-range torque, which is what you want.
Right.
But then when you crack into that high RPM, it's thrilling. I mean, you get that exhilaration that you would expect from a Ducati. And one of the things that's really unique about the motor as well, we took it from what we learned in MotoGP. It has a counter-rotating crankshaft.
Right.
So as opposed to the crankshaft, moving the normal direction, there's a reverse direction which reduces the gyroscopic effect. So basically, it takes a bigger motorcycle, and it's really flickable. It handles really easy. It's interesting how it reduces that.
Right. I guess I didn't think of that. That's interesting. And the guards, these are all standard or extra?
Yeah, actually, as you see the bike, it's only been equipped with engine protection bars down below.
Right.
So if people want to take it off-road, they have the ability to do so without worrying too much about dropping it, because it does happen. But hand guards and everything are standard. Heated seats, heated grips.
Heated seats, that's hilarious to me, yeah.
Well, this is, one of the things, a lot of motorcycles, when they're riding long distance, they want that comfort.
Oh, yeah. I had a Ducati with the heated seats until I realized the wires were burning. I went, this is really comfortable. What's that? Hey, and all the black wires were now just burned, So, yeah, it's amazing how far the company has come. And I'm so glad that it was rescued, because that's really what you have to do nowadays. There are so many rules and regulations that small manufacturers have to team up with somebody bigger who could just get you through the process. I remember there was a high-end manufacturer here. I won't say which one it was, but the car was in the millions of dollars, and it had black seatbelts. And I said, I'm surprised the seatbelts don't match the color of the interior. He said, well, we do so many custom colors, it costs $35,000 a belt to test each color. Because the color, they got to paint it, they dye it, and then do all the pull tests to see if that color affects the fiber at all. And there are so many things you don't even realize as a small manufacturer. So you need to team up with General Motors or Volkswagen Group or Toyota or somebody, you know. So anybody thinks it's less a Ducati because of that, no, it's a much better bike, because you have the soul, you have the essence of the bike, which is the fabulous Italian engineering and motor, combined with the reliable electrics, you know.
Yeah, in fact, that was one of the things that, I've been working for Ducati for almost 20 years now.
Yeah.
And I remember when we were going through that transaction, and the then CEO of Audi said, we want Ducati to remain Ducati.
Right.
So the character, the soul, the inspiration, the things that why people love Ducati hasn't changed. In fact, they've gotten better, because we haven't had to worry about and to think really too much about those other things that we have now the support of being part of a larger group for.
Right. You know, so there was an old joke about the ideal world. The policemen are English, the chefs are Italian, somebody else is French, and the worst world is where the chefs are German, the electrics are Italian, you know, and they switched it all around. But it was just like a funny gag that used to just circulate, you know, and you don't have those problems anymore. Yeah, it's fit and finish look fabulous on it. It really looks good, and of course you got Brembo brakes, and you know, I'm so glad that manufacturers do this now. They just find that people make the best product, and let's put that on our bike. In the old days, everybody make their own caliper, and they wouldn't be as good, you know, but everybody specializes in something. So you've got Brembos, and of course you've got the Italian engine, you've got the German electrics. Can you show us the screen?
So it starts off with a nice little animation, and
Right.
you've got this big 8-inch screen that has all of this information that you need while you're riding, as opposed to having it separated with all the, you know, typical lights all around.
Right.
A couple really cool features that are easy to be able to use right on the fly are all controlled with a left switchcraft over here. And the first one I'll show you is the preload, because it's usually typically something people will adjust on a motorcycle if they're going on a ride and they're having a passenger or bags.
Right.
So you just push the button once, and now it's set up the preload for one rider.
Right.
You can adjust it to the rider plus luggage, a rider and a passenger, or a rider, passenger, and luggage. And
okay.
so as an example, this bike will eventually have a rider and baggage. You push the button, you can hear it mechanically adjusting the preload. So
Yeah.
preload is now set to accommodate passenger.
Oh, that's interesting, isn't it?
And then the 4 bikes in one that we were talking about. This is the concept that we launched in 2010, but we've made it even easier, where you hit the little mode button here and use the joystick, and you can scroll between the different modes, between urban, sport,
Now,
touring.
sport is red. I assume that gives you the most power.
Exactly. In fact, you can see right here, it specifies that the engine is delivering the top amount of horsepower, so they call it engine high.
So here you get your full 170 horsepower. I imagine urban is what, 115, something
Yeah,
like
it's something just a little over 100 horsepower.
Yeah, okay.
So it's reduced, and it also delivers it in a much smoother, progressive way,
Right.
as opposed to in sport mode. Sport mode and touring have the same horsepower, but sport is, let's say, quicker throttle reaction and response.
And you can shift without the clutch in every mode or just in sport?
Yes, in every mode.
Oh, so just bang.
Exactly. In fact, you see it down here. It's called Ducati Quick Shift On.
Right, right.
And you can program any of these modes as well to be able to set it up custom. So you can take sport mode and turn quick shift off if you want.
Right.
And then all of the adjustment for the suspension settings, the traction control, ABS, wheelie control, etc.
Now, wheelie control, does that keep it from going over? Or what are you controlling exactly?
Well, it depends on what level you have the wheelie control set at.
Okay.
So in sport mode, it's set at 2, so it's one of the lowest levels of
So
intervention.
it's wheels off the ground.
So you can get like a power wheelie, like
Right.
a little roll-on wheelie. But then if you
Okay.
have it in enduro mode, it's not the wheelie control's turned off. But in touring, it's on 3, so it's at the highest level of
So
intervention.
what is that, like that?
So wheelie control at 3 means you probably maybe get the front wheel off the ground an inch.
Okay. Oh, okay.
If you whacked on the throttle really
Right,
hard.
right, okay.
So, but it just prevents you from, looping the bike if you get a little too crazy. But
And we're looking at 6 speeds?
yeah, so 6-speed transmission.
Right.
And the beauty is, while it is manual transmission, you have those clutchless up and down shifts with the quick shift.
And down as well.
Yes.
Oh, I thought the old days you had to use a clutch to come down but not go up.
Yeah, and in this case, it does it either way, which is really
Oh, okay.
nice.
Oh, that's interesting.
It's a little interesting to start, to
Yeah.
use it the first time you use it, because your mind, as an experienced motorcyclist,
Right,
you always
right.
naturally want to pull in the clutch, and I still find myself doing that. But So these are the riding modes you can go through, and then this is this really new technology, the adaptive cruise control. You push the button in here, and you can choose the distance that you want to be between the car in front of you, and set it to very far, far, medium, or near.
Right.
And that, it gives you that amount of time that once you set the speed with the cruise control, I'll set it to far as an example, turn the cruise control on, and then once you set the speed, it will maintain that speed until a car comes in front of you, and then it will maintain the gap.
And how much of this now is mandated by law, Eurospec? I know you have to have, all bikes have to have ABS, because I know they were trying to produce the new Brough Superior in France there, and they didn't know, and so they had to delay it because they had to go back and put it. What is actually mandatory? You have to have ABS.
Well, ABS is definitely mandatory, and a lot of the other regulations are basically emissions compliance in terms of engine noise, exhaust, and then emissions themselves. This technology, we're the first ones to market with it, and we wanted to lead. And in fact, when we launched this motorcycle, we made it a point that not only did we want to be class leading in terms of low cost of ownership, reliability, but also in terms of technology and comfort.
Right.
So these are all, this is just a portion of the things. You can actually sync your phone to this. Well, this will mirror your phone's navigation app through a company we work with called Cygic.
And that goes in here, right?
Exactly. This little center console here
there you go.
Pops it open, and then you're able to put your phone in here.
And you have a charging port right there.
Yeah, and that way you also keep the clutter away from handlebars. And it allows you to sync also with an intercom system. So if you're listening to music or if you've got a call or something, it will actually connect with your intercom system, and it's all controllable through the Switchcraft here and your dash.
Yeah, I remember the days you could just go for a ride. Now your boss can reach you at any time. The wife and kids can track you down. Yeah, that's that's guys to be thrilled with that.
It's called airplane mode.
Yeah, just say, honey, I didn't know how to work it. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, very well. I like this for the phone. That's really neat. You just don't want to drive off and you park it and you think you locked it and left your key in there.
Try to keep your key in your pocket.
Yeah, that's true. Okay.
But the dash itself, like I said, it has all this information, but it's really neat because it's all navigation. All the navigation is done with like a little joystick here.
Right.
So you can choose everything that you want, from the heated seats to crank it up to high, low, or off, and heated grips, etc.
Right.
And you can even change.
Heated grips and heated seats are separate, or?
Yes, they are separate.
Oh, okay.
Because sometimes, you want your heat on your grips cranked up.
Yeah, my left hand should be a little warmer than my right hand, and my index finger gets cold, so I need a special index finger heater holder. Yeah. It's amazing how much electronics. Not only is it's amazing how compact it is. The fact that it's not some big. It wasn't that long ago. Well, it is long ago, I guess. It's 20 years ago, but when ABS would be like this big thing, like the size of a saddlebag in the trunk, controlling everything. And someday all cars will have this, And now it's smaller than your iPhone.
Exactly, and actually that was one of the things that led us to the technology of adding radar, is because we found a solution working with Bosch to be able to have a very small device on the front and the back of the bike.
Right.
Because it has to look good too. It has to integrate into the design of the bike.
Gotcha.
We're Italian, so the style comes first. It has to have that emotional connection. But now that the technology and it works just beautifully, and especially not only with the radar gives you the cruise control, but the blind spot detection is incredible. And we'll get a chance to experience that when we're out riding.
And is this adjustable? Obviously, I see it's right here, so it's not. Oh, it's not. I mean, I have to go like this. Oh, there's no button to put. Oh, I have to move my hand like this. Oh.
There still is the mechanical thing that occasionally.
Carpal tunnel now. Okay, that's great. Oh, that's great. Yeah, it's pretty amazing, and it doesn't say, what's your ride height here? What is it about?
The ride height is anywhere from 31.8 inches, and it goes almost up to 35 inches, like 34 and a half. So adjustable seat, so you have a seat in a couple different positions.
Oh, you can adjust it, huh?
Yeah, and also some different seat heights depending on the rider. I'm a big guy, but I don't have long legs.
Right.
And so I usually ride it in the kind of the third position in terms of height.
Yeah, because I know a lot of women that like bikes, and people don't realize, if you can get your foot on the ground, you can hold a 1,200-pound bike, as long as you put your feet on. If you're on tiptoes, then that's when you go over. So this looks taller than it actually is, isn't it? Once you.
Absolutely, and that's actually one of the things that the engineers and designers really worked on. Is it's not just the seat height; it's what they call the inner leg curve, which
Right.
is, to your point, getting both feet on the ground,
Right,
and they
right.
narrow this spot out so that you're not splayed when
Yeah.
you're sitting on the bike.
Yeah, and the cases are not so wide that you hit them. Yeah.
And then, we're talking about comfort. It's one of the other things that we really pay close attention to is, you're sitting on this 170 horsepower V4 power plant. It's naturally going to put off a little bit of heat,
Right.
right? So we found a couple different solutions. One is technical, where we have rear cylinder deactivation, so that when you come to a stop sign and you pull in the clutch or the bike's in neutral and it's at a certain temperature, it will actually deactivate the rear bank of cylinders.
Oh, okay.
So you're not sitting on you're not sitting on the back of the motor getting that heat. And then when you're going down the road, we also have these little winglets that are down on the side on both sides
So
here.
you can open and close.
They actually direct cool air to the
Right.
rider so that they stay cooler while they're out there riding.
And then I say, I always buy a bike on style, and then I get it here, and because it's always a cafe where I'm leaning over. I do this all the time. I realize, no, this looks like a comfortable bar. It looks like a nice compromise in the fact that you're not all the way over all the time.
Yeah, you're not leaned back like you would on a
Right.
chopper, but you still have the feel of
Right.
the front end, and that's, in my opinion, that's where really a distinguishing characteristic of Ducati is. Like, it's got to still have that soul,
Yeah.
and it has to have that front end feel,
Yeah.
so that it gives you confidence when you're riding.
I hate when the European manufacturers build American bikes because they always try to build their version of a Harley, and they look awful. I mean, build what you build, and that's what people like. I mean, it's not. Well, you know what I'm talking about. They always just look weird. They always have the extended front end and some kind of bobber deal going, and they don't quite get it.
Yeah, people come to Ducati because of our performance and the style, and and to your point earlier, and the point of trust and confidence and reliability. That's something that over the last 20 years we've been working on, with the point where now we're industry leading.
Yeah, and Ducati always had mechanicalness, which I like. I used to call my Halewood a Harley that went to college in Europe, because it was a V-twin, but it was Desmo drive, which means you had a shaft driving. The valves didn't float because they weren't on springs. You had a shaft and a gear, and you had a window. You could buy this piece, so you could watch the gear turn around and activate the valves, and it's the greatest bike. I mean,
the
I
bevel
still
drives
ride
them.
it. It's fantastic. Yeah.
What are they? Gear gazer, those little bevel windows, right?
Is that what they call it? Gear gazer?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, still to me, to this day, I love the mechanical portion of
Yeah,
a motorcycle. But the one thing that is really unique about this motor for the first time in years, it's the first non-Desmo motor.
I guess that's true. Well, there's no reason for Desmo anymore because metallurgy has increased. It doesn't matter. Desdromic valves came around because valves were flowed because metal would start to get, well, quote, confused, as you say. It wouldn't react. It can only bounce so many times and rebound so quickly, and that's when they floated. But with the gear, you could open and close it, bam, slam, slam, slam. So, but there's really no need for Desdromic anymore because metallurgy has advanced to the point where it's not necessary.
Yeah, in fact, we still utilize Desmo on the V4 in our sport bikes because it allows us to rev to a much higher RPM.
Right.
But for the purposes of this bike, where you want torque, you don't necessarily need the 234 horsepower.
Right.
You want torque, and 170 is pretty darn good for.
Well, I always say horsepower sells the vehicle, torque wins races.
I love that.
Yeah, and Desmo has become their Hemi. It's a word you associate with Ducati, and so it's like Porsche now has the Taycan Turbo S. It's electric. There's no turbo on it. Stop calling it the Turbo S. It drives me crazy. I don't understand why people. I want to get the one with a turbo. There's no turbo. Oh no, it does. The salesman. No, it's electric. You can't have a turbo on it, but it works. It sells.
Yeah, it becomes almost a brand in itself.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, a lot of Hemis are not Hemis, but the name Hemi, it just becomes a brand name, Yeah. Well, cool. Can we take these for a ride? I'm anxious to try this.
I was hoping you would say.
Yeah, let's do it. Cool.
Well, first impression is riding position very comfortable. Boy, these bars are just perfect, at least for me. It's rare I got on a bike where the bars are perfect, but they're terrific. Comfortable riding position. That's one area where modern motorcycles have gotten so good. Rear, these rear view mirrors, these side mirrors. Even as late as 2000, I bought one of those MV Agustas that came out, the Oro. And I got so tired of my Ducati looking at my elbows and my shoulder in the mirror, so I thought, when I get the new Oro, it'll be great. And of course, it was the exact same thing. I have to kind of stretch to look out. Whereas these are perfect. Plus, no vibration at all. I can clearly see what's behind me.
You know, there are simple things like putting little rubber mounts inside the handlebars that help reduce that vibration that just fixes those things.
Well, you know, I'm surprised it took so long. What we used to do when we got bikes when I was a teenager, you'd cut up an inner tube, and then you'd match the inner tube to the bracket. You'd put the inner tube around the inside of the bracket, and then bolt the whole thing to the bike. And that took care of a little bit of it. Not much, but enough to make a difference.
Shade tree ingenuity.
There you go. I always wonder how they come up with a number like 170 for this model. You know, you have an engineer that can make an engine that goes anywhere from 150 to 234 horsepower. How do they decide that 170 is the perfect sort of compromise?
Well, it's interesting you ask that, because what they did is the focus was put on how it delivers the torque, and that was increasing the torque in the rev range where you ride it and the gear that you ride it, which is like 25% increase in third gear.
Right.
And that's, that's what you feel.
Right.
It's not that top end. And so I think that, the previous version of the bike on the Twin was a little over 160. So, but you always got to give it a little bit of room to be able to bump it up in a couple of years as well.
Sure.
And there is such a thing, especially if you're riding it off-road, where there's too much power.
Right.
Where it's not going to connect and you're not going to hook up and get the traction you need on like a fire road.
Well, I've got it in sport and it's very comfortable. Admittedly, it's not a rough road, but it's LA terrible road.
Yeah, I'm actually riding it right now in Enduro. Not Enduro, excuse me, Urban. And it absorbs the bumps a little bit. It's a little bit softer suspension, and then, like I said, just kind of not the off the throttle snap that you would get in sport.
I'm used to riding hardtail, so this is like a Cadillac. Now, what does that H mean down in the corner on the left-hand side?
The H is for vehicle hold control.
Oh.
So if the bike is in neutral and you pull in the brake hard, it will light up and it will hold until you put it in gear and accelerate.
Oh, I see.
So if you're on a hill, you don't have to have the brake held in all the time.
Oh, that's interesting. The red line is 10 grand, which just makes me laugh.
Compared to some of your old Desmos?
Yeah, good luck with that. It's nice to use the clutchless shifting on the way down as well.
It's really smooth and it takes a little bit of getting used to, but once you do it, you kind of don't go back.
Yeah. The trouble is you get on a bike without it and you wind up killing yourself.
It's like a right side shift.
I know.
Putting the brake on.
Yeah, it is incredibly smooth.
And if you downshift and you just crack on that throttle, it'll open right up as you'd expect it to.
Yeah, it's amazing you have a 4-valve motor with this kind of torque.
A big part of the way it delivers the power also is the firing order of the cylinders.
Yeah.
It's a twin pulse, so it basically fires like a twin. It gives you that traction and that torque, but you still get to rev it like a 4.
You know, it's funny how the old rules of motorcycling don't even apply to modern bikes. They always used to tell you, you don't want to hold the clutch in at the light, because if the ball end at the end of the clutch cable pops off, it'll shoot you into traffic. But I mean, those things don't happen anymore.
No, not with hydraulic clutches. I mean,
that's what I mean, but that used to be fairly common on old Triumphs and VSAs. You're sitting there in first gear holding it at the light, and all of a sudden, boom! the bike just throws you into traffic and you get nailed because the ball end came off the cable. I've had it happen to me a couple of times, not at stoplights, but just while shifting.
Well, I broke a
Yeah.
clutch cable before. Yeah, all the old 70s bikes were
Yeah.
notorious for going through clutch cables.
But you've got plenty of torque no matter where you are in the range. Let's see.
Yeah, the idea is from that mid-range to the top end, it's like a 25%
Yeah.
increase from the previous generation motor, which, you know, people are always concerned when you're going to go to a four-cylinder that you run the risk
Right.
of losing that torque. But
Well, I mean, at 60 miles an hour, you turn in just a hair under $4,000, which seems like a lot until you realize the red line is about a little over 10,000.
and then when you crack the throttle, you know, you get that superbike motor
Yeah, it
coming
really is
alive.
nice.
I love the fact that our engineers, no matter what power plant we end up utilizing, we always seem to maintain that visceral feeling that you get from a Ducati. You know, you never want to compromise that because that's part of the character of a motorcycle is how the engine, you know, it's the strongest muscle is the motor, the heart of our bikes.
Well, I like how Ducati stay with the V engine configuration. V-twin, V4, or big single. They never went to an inline.
No, and in fact, it's interesting on this, while it's a V, we changed the position so it isn't like an L, you know, like you would see on a traditional, like a Dharma or any of that era bikes, or even your old Halewood with that L twin. But keeping that same shape but rotating a little bit actually allows us to have a little bit of better clearance with the front wheel and change the chassis setup.
Was it about 60 degrees?
Exactly.
Oh, it is 60? Okay.
Yeah, it's still a 90-degree twin, but it's rotated up into the chassis
Right.
a little bit.
Right. You know, the only time I ever go off-road is when I'm on the road and I accidentally go off the road. So I don't do a lot of off-road stuff. How does this measure up?
Well, it's actually a big departure from what we've had in the past generations of Multistradas. And, you know, it really starts with the wheel. The front wheel on the motorcycle is a 19-inch versus a 17-inch, which is, you know, much more of a road-going sport wheel.
Right.
So we've done that, and then we have a spoked rim that is a tubeless spoked rim. In fact, you see the spokes go to the outside edge of the rim.
Right.
So it allows you to run a tubeless tire. But between the way the chassis, the motor's tuned, and the entire setup, and then the riding mode of Enduro, it gives the rider a lot of confidence off-road. And, you know, the great part, you're talking about that handlebar position and the comfort. You can rotate the handlebar up for off-road riding, and you've removed little rubber inside the pegs.
Yeah.
And you've got some excellent traction as well. So, you know, the electronic aids help, but good old school geometry and body position is a big part of it as well.
What am I looking at weight-wise?
474 pounds dry.
What's that, about 520 wet?
By the time, throw
Right.
battery, fuel, everything else, as we were talking about with that counter-rotating crankshaft, you wouldn't recognize that this bike
Yeah.
was 474 pounds. You know, you start throwing it into the corners and it feels significantly lighter than that.
Well, Jason, thanks for bringing this by. You know, I know a lot of times people live in an area where there isn't a Ducati dealership, and you guys don't do a lot of advertising, so it's fun to be able to help out this way so people can see exactly what's out there. And it really is a multi-purpose bike. Very, very cool.
Well, thank you, Jay. It's an honor for us, not only to be able to share our product, but to be able to share it with somebody who's enthusiastic about motorcycling and Ducati as you.
Very nice. Well, let's see what you can do. We'll see you guys next